So perception begins when sense certainty ends. And instead of just knowing that objects exist, you also know what the objects are. So this is possible by synthesizing different qualities of an object. For example, if you take the apple is red, round, and edible, and then you add your subjective ideas of those qualities onto it. So, for example, you might think something that's red, round, and edible is delicious and sweet. And by synthesizing these different qualities, you perceive the object of the apple. And immediately you can see the parallels this idea has with Kant's theory of the synthetic unity of apperception. And that is to do with how a human mind unifies an objective space of appearances with their subjective ideas and innate qualities, or as he calls them, the categories, to perceive and understand objects around them. And another interesting idea Hegel talks about in his section on perception is the idea of concrete universality and how it overdetermines abstract universality. And concrete universality is the manifestation of essence, and essence here is Kant's thing in itself, and the abstract universality is the essence. And so you can think of the concrete universality as the noumenon, the phenomenon, and the abstract universality as the noumenon. And so the concrete is the representation, and the abstract is the form prior to representation, or the essence. And what Hegel means by how the concrete universality overdetermines abstract universality is a reversal of a traditional Kantian idea or German idealist idea, which is that essence comes prior to the representation. And so the phenomenal realm is dependent on the noumenal realm, but yet the noumenal realm is not dependent on the phenomenal realm, and it can exist by itself without the phenomenal realm. But for Hegel, this idea is inherently wrong, and instead, he argues that appearances are where reality begins, and the appearance of perception of something determines its essence. So representations come prior to the thing that is represented, which might seem like a paradoxical idea, but then you can also think of it as how both are equally as reliant on the other. And the idea of a representation coming prior to an essence is very similar to Jean-Paul Sartre's famous quote, "Existence precedes essence," which lays the foundation for existentialism. And this is why Sartre, at least in Being and Nothingness, was just a Hegelian trying to fit Hegelian ideas into a postmodern world. And consciousness for Hegel is either being in itself or being for another. And this dichotomy between being in itself and being for another will be talked about later in this lecture. However, perception cannot explain the unity of the perceptual object. So perception negates itself and proceeds to force into understanding, which is the next section of the phenomenology of spirit, which Hegel talks about. And what the unity of the perceptual object is how the apple or the object of perception is synthesized with all of the different qualities. How do we synthesize an objective quality, subjective idea? And what exactly causes the synthesis? And what is the synthesis? How does the synthesis happen? And to explain this, Hegel talks about his idea of force in the understanding.